そこから出られるぞ何
Dear God, who designed this place? And thus we come to the end of Pegasus's arc, as he finally comes to center stage as an antagonist. The thing about Pegasus in hindsight, though, is he really isn't that much of a villain. Sure, he uses mind games, can act pretty cruelly to get what he wants, but in comparison to a lot of the other villains in the franchise, he is relatively benign. Him seeming more malicious with how he often used things of personal value against the heroes, not to threaten them, but to make them choose to fight on his terms. Sugoroku and Mokuba, while his prisoners, weren't exactly treated poorly in his care, and while his minions were often malicious, it wasn't as if they were following the spirit of his orders. But now, with the finals upon us, he becomes more of an active focus as opposed to just biding his time, as Seto wishes to reclaim his brother.
もしペガサスが負けちまったら俺たちの優勝決定戦が中止になっちまうってこともあるからな。
No. Kaiba's duel against Pegasus is entirely outside of the actual tournament, as he is not a competitor in the tournament. This duel in no way affects that. It is even in narrative an exhibition match. Yeah, the subs are better at relating the story, but it doesn't mean that every now and then something stupid from this medium transfer doesn't rear its head. But Pegasus's mind game works in settling Seto into his playing ground so as to spare the soulless Mokuba the cost of using his system as a proxy. Spare himself the pain of playing against his brother like this.
それだけはできない。
And thus falls into the effect of Pegasus's Millennium Eye, and its power to read people's minds through eye contact. The thing that always bugged me about the Millennium items is their powers always seemed pretty ambiguous. While each of them had one true, defined power, the definition of the rest tended to vary wildly in ability. Usually written off as the shadow games each of them would allow their users to implement, and the varying sealing abilities the magic of the universe would implement in various forms. But without Pegasus's mind-reading ability, it's pretty clear that he wouldn't hold a candle to Seto in tactical experience with how silly his monsters are, all of them tying inevitably to the first true archetype of the game, the Toon monsters. Toons got massively nerfed when they were made into real cards, most of which have been shown to be redacted over time, as when they originally came out, their restrictions, such as mandatory life point payments for activation and attack, made them borderline unplayable, even in the fledgling days of the game. The only thing they had going for them was most of them could be special summoned, and then used as a wall or to bypass battle, but playstyle-wise were nonetheless hard to use. But as a way of expressing Pegasus' true self from a story perspective, works well to explore his character. Despite it being based on the Shadow Games and other monsters of the realm, Pegasus started out creating this game and his company to bring laughter and joy to others, just as cartoons were a source of that in his own childhood. He's watched Who Framed Roger Rabbit one too many times. But it's a sign of his underlying innocence that makes him an interesting antagonist in how that beneficial wish has been corrupted. Seto, of course, loses because, even as the series recognizes, Toons in their anime form were utterly cheap.
2つのカードはこんなに近くても2つの心のいる場所はあまりにも遠い。いっそあの世に行けたならば再会を喜び合えたかもしれませんね。
But the act puts to rest the view of Seto as an antagonist in the core group's eyes as they set their sights on getting through the finals, and figuring out Pegasus' motivations for all this. Which is mostly wasted in a single filler episode that's worthless to the grand scheme since the audience already knew much of what was going down already, and what they're shown only raises further questions. Still, the Mai vs. Yugi duel has a large difference in tone in the original version. Between Yugi being so close to facing Pegasus and the earlier portrayal by Atem, he's completely off his game as he's not focusing on what's in front of him, whereas from interaction with Mai, she's changed her motivations, and now seeks a level of validation in her ability from someone she's managed to befriend after a lifetime alone. But now, he only views her as being an obstacle in his way, just as she used to look at others. It acts as a continuance of the wake-up call her short game with Anzu showcased, and the continuance of Pride being a Tem's sin as he once more assumes control, and it's obvious she's in control throughout all of this as he executes little to no strategy in his plays.
今のあなたは大切なことを見失っているわ。見えるけど、見えないもの。そして、本当の自分に向き合った時、その言葉の意味が分かったわ。
And while it's not the confrontation such a situation should inspire within their soul, it does work to begin the reconciliation between the two, allowing them to move forward once again, just as Mai had to learn to when she believed she lost everything.
みんな心に弱さを持っている。でも、本当は自分の弱さが見えているのに、目を背けようとする。目を背けることこそ、心の弱さだと気づかずに、私はこの負けによってさらに強くなる自信があるわ。そして最後に夢をつかむ。
Oh hey, look! Character development, the dub size that plays massively into later parts of the series.
Jonochi vs. Keith, by comparison, is more consistent with Jonochi's general motive for duels. His opponent's cheating. This time, Keith stealing his entry card, only for Mai to give her his now that she doesn't need it, and reveal how much she's really grown in just a few days.
このハンカチ濡れてる。
ジョノウチ、簡単に望みを捨てるなよ。叶うといいわね。
お前なんで俺なんかのために。
ぐずぐずしてる暇ないでしょ。
お
勝つのよ。仲間だからに決まってるでしょ。
But the problems with Keith only continue, with even more anime-only rules discarded after this. Machine monsters Keith uses being immune to spell cards and spellcaster attacks.
Except, that was a warrior monster. Jonochi has mostly warrior and beast warrior monsters in his deck. Kind of another reason I'm glad someone other than Kazuki Takahashi started writing the scripts to the duels in the later series, as this just got boring by this point to run into this stuff.
Keith also has other underhanded tactics, baiting Jonochi by accidentally revealing his cards and hiding equipped spells in his armbands.
Not like that work in a real game due to the proximity to the other player. And yeah, due to my propensity for armbands, I've been checked by other players that watched these episodes back in the day. Kind of why I stopped wearing them for a while.
And otherwise shown to be a poor player throughout these tactics. While knowledgeable in the game as shown by his prior mentoring of his lackeys, he's just not able to play it well on his own. Though the dub really hurt the flow of things with its censorship of Barrel Dragon, especially with how they'd execute its coin flip destruction effect. Many have said in 4Kid's defense that even if they were aiming higher in demographic closer to the series' originally intended audience than that of the Short Bus Brigade, its revolver arm still would have likely needed censoring, as that's something any company across the board would have had to do to get this broadcast due to US broadcast standards and practices.
I could buy that, and also that being a reason behind them visually editing guns out so people pointed with just their fingers, when they could have just edited them into tasers.
And yes, I think that of the banned Safari Zone episode of Pokemon as well. How hard is it to visually edit a gun into a goddamn taser that already existed at that point in time? Especially since you pulled that shit later with One Piece.
Anyways, I could buy that if not for two key reasons. One, their alterations then excise the fact that it was an effect of the monster that allowed it to blow away Jonochi's monsters, a detail that existed regardless of them being gun ammunition or laser cannons. And less forgivable since the explanation for that is right fucking there in the original dialogue!
2. Other shows this series ran parallel to, which included such, did not have these problems or restrictions. Every Gundam series aired before Seed got away with it, and only Seed's broadcast version had the ridiculous disco guns. Outlaw Star just replaced the gun noises with laser sounds for broadcast. Digimon, which had gun barrel weapons as part of their arsenal or body, make it past censors without a single official complaint. Deputymon, Rise Greymon, Gargomon, Beelzemon. Hell, because of the latter two, Digimon Tamers is technically guilty of having gratuitous gun violence even in the broadcast dub!
And I'll remind people that Digimon Tamers is the one that is ridiculously heavy on nightmare fuel because it was made by a guy who writes Lovecraft. And it also aired at the exact same time this series was in this arc.
Hell, at the time of this episode's airing in the US, this series was shown on Kids WB right up with Static Shock, a series that had episodes directly talking about gun, race, and gang violence, and showing it all as a bad thing. This is also showing the use of guns all being by bad people, and made clear you do not want to emulate them.
It's almost as if it wasn't censorship laws and standards and practices mandating this. So, no, I really don't see that as a valid defense due to the ways 4Kids used it, especially since this has remained edited in all home video releases as opposed to just being the broadcast version kind of thing.
Still, I love how Jonouchi overcomes it, with the power of the dragon that brings potential. Even if the real card version of Red Eye's Black Metal Dragon is complete garbage due to its play restrictions. Keith is then a hateful sore loser, and Pegasus' means of dealing with him are just so in tune with his love of cartoons. I'd say Jonouchi vs. Yugi was an even better match, and by the plays of the game and how it shows how Jonouchi's learned to take full utilization of his broad-range strategies, theft and copy abilities, and just gambling luck, it is. But the problem is, with the medium transfer, they then drag the entire thing out with them interrupting the game to comment, "Wow, that was a good move. Oh no, they're friends that are fighting each other in a fucking tournament where they've reached a win-win situation between every single fucking turn."
And thus why the non-duelist fifth wheels of the series so came to grate on people, especially as the number of unnecessary commenters increased. They would take away from the ante and interest of the match with all the unnecessary padding, distractions, and repetitious dialogue. No matter the scripted version, that's still there, and that becomes a problem for the entire rest of the series.
Keep in mind, this is just a 2-episode duel, nothing else. Later, they'd commonly stretch them out to 3 or 4 parts with little to justify that extended runtime. Can you imagine how bad that could have become had they not made the later filler arcs? Especially as it interrupts arguably my favorite play of this game, of Jonouchi using his cards to create another evolution of his dragon's potential despite only one of the key components being his. It shows that at this point Jonouchi, as a normal player, has become better at the game than an unassisted Atem, as using your opponent's resources against them is surprisingly difficult. And it's only because of, once again, unknown monster effect Deus Ex Machina, that Jonouchi doesn't win. The Black Magician advancing into the Black Sage, and giving Atem new cards to play, which utterly wrecked Jonouchi's otherwise excellent manipulations. Which brings us to the 5-episode duel with Pegasus, one of the longest in the franchise.
And while some of them have been equally as long, we've only had 4 that have been longer. Atem vs. Seto in Battle City, versus Darts in the Doma arc, Yusei vs. Zone in 5Ds, the Zexal protagonist against Don 1000, and of course, the all-out war against the resurrected Zark in Arc V.
But again, due to pacing, this one seems to drag on the most out of all of the longer played duels due to the freaking padding surrounding the game. Some of it commentary on the game, some of it recapping the events of the last 34 episodes that had brought them here. Other, Honda's wandering through Pegasus' castle and attempts to free Pegasus' soulless prisoners. And then there's Yami Bakura entering the picture again. But instead of the dub's stated reason of trying to take the soulless Mokuba as a host, he tries to do the same thing Pegasus had been with the boy. Get the key card that's been used as a lockout for vital contracts tied to the Kaiba Corporation.
Why the Spirit of the Ring would want them is anyone's guess, considering what we'd eventually see and learn of his motivations. I'd like to think this is more the impulsiveness of Thief King Bakura wanting to steal something when he's given the opportunity, which does inform his eventually revealed character. Especially since the company's resources would make finding the other Millennium items thereafter easier, since, Pegasus kind of did the same thing.
But yeah, this makes a hell of a lot more sense than the trying to use him as a host for my evil soul thing that the dub tried to pull. Especially since he never tried to do that again, even though many other people would be left soulless which he could have done this with at any time. And they only had to pull it because they removed the subplot entirely of the card Mokuba's hidden being key to gaining control of Kaiba Corp. Oh look, he had that opportunity for what the dub said he was supposed to be doing. I guess that's just another dub-induced plot hole.
It's almost as if dialogue substitutions for plot central details is a bad thing or something.
Which honestly vie for more attention in the main duel, as it's the same point over and over again. Pegasus reading a Tem's mind to figure out his plays, until Yugi steps in and the pair start switching who's in control.
このパズルを解いた日から、ずっともう一人の僕と入れ替わりながら暮らしてきたんだ。
It's admittedly a clever way to deal with it, but one that's extremely situational a solution, and depends on factors that are inconsistent with the presentation of the Millennium Eye previously, where in the prior finals game, he was appearing to read both players' minds simultaneously. There's no narrative clue to these restrictions of the Eye before this, with which to key in this way to overcome it. But because of gaining an immunity to the mind reading, the pair can formulate a strategy to remove Toon World from the field. And that's where things take a turn for the worse. For as bad as Pegasus has been thus far, there's been an underlying innocence to his actions the Toons have reflected. But with them gone, that tone vanishes, and Pegasus turns this into a shadow game that slowly drains away Yugi's constitution with the strain of existing in such a realm, eventually crushing him and leaving a Tem alone, and thus once more under the effect of Pegasus's Eye, as he calls upon the ritual monster Sacrifice, aka Relinquished.
I admit, I love this thing. Back when the game was new, it was one of my aces. Rituals were pretty rare for a long time, because Upper Deck, who released the game at the time, utterly refused to release many of the cards the OCG got early on until years later. Say what you will of Konami, but at least the only times they don't release cards, they have a legitimate reason for it, like, say, Maji Magician Girl running into censorship issues despite, there not being any real need to censor it since other monsters have appeared more sexually explicit than it without problems. It's a stupid reason, but at least it's a reason.
And this thing just grew stronger the more powerful your enemy's monsters were. Back before almost every deck revolved around special summoning, it could be pretty difficult to attack it twice in a turn, and it's still decently useful in a ritual deck even today. Especially once its fusion form, Thousand Eyes Restrict, came into play, preventing opposing attacks, and it's understandable why that monster would be one of the first additions to the ban list back when the ban list was about preventing strategies that permit automatic win conditions, as opposed to ensuring the dominion of the newest released metagame chase cards. Still, when fighting a ritual monster, sometimes all you need is another ritual monster and the Deus Ex Machina of Karibos.
滅びの呪文デスアルテマ
With his defeat, Pegasus releases his victims as promised, Yami Bakura coming for his eye and seeing right through his reasons for doing all this, gloating and overwhelming him before just yanking his item out of its socket.
全てが揃えば世界を支配できるほどのパワーを手に入れられるんだぜ。
やめろやめてくれ
In the manga version of things, Pegasus is straight up murdered, while the anime later reveals he survived this encounter. And frankly, I feel that was a beneficial change due to him later playing a lot into the character dynamics, while also accenting the setting of the later series and then GX with his continued involvement.
Still, it's easy to see from the following explanations why he's done all this. He just wanted his wife back, hoping to use the power of the Millennium Items and Seto's solid vision technology to not only call her back from beyond the Veil of Death, but give her form again, even if she would only just be a projection of light made tangible while her soul rested within a playing card.
シンディアのカードを実体化するため、何としても海馬コーポレーションを我が物に。
Ironic, considering the Virtual World arc later down the line.
But that underlying desire led him to cross paths with the true malicious power in Yugioh, Shadi, who approached him and fooled him into following him down into the Tomb of the Pharaoh, implanting his eye into him, which showed him all the visions needed to bring representatives of the ancient Shadow Games back to life, into their newest form with his artistry talents, from the slabs of stone into the cards of the modern day, all from a vision of having his beloved back again, something he would never be allowed to have.
Or, you could wait a few years until children Shadi took care of revealed that he had a magic artifact that allows one to travel across dimensions and even visit the realm of the dead freely. Then you could just go say hi to your wife after Kaiba's done using it. Dark Side of Dimensions just raises so many questions.
But that's the thing about most of the chief Yu-Gi-Oh! Antagonists. They're not really villains, just people who have lost their way and either been corrupted or misled by other forces or powers, either becoming unknowing puppets and pawns or need to otherwise be confronted on the actions they are committing. Some of them do have good reasons for what they're doing, but the extremes they've gone to have become the problem. They've been given power, why not use it to gain what they desire? Speaking of Shadi, the Studio Gallop anime redoes his introduction for those who need the refresher, and it's a good one to have since it allows more exploration of Atem, as he's more and more come out of Yugi's shadow, Shadi telling of how he was the one to seal the magic required for this ancient game away, with the power of his own soul, and it's only been with his reawakening that has become to invade the world yet again. And as the one who solved the puzzle, it's Yugi's job to deal with it. Regardless, all of the dissolved victims recover, Jonochi gets the money needed to save his sister's sight, and the Kaiba brothers reunite.
遊戯、木馬を助けてもらったようだな。一つ借りができた。
Pretty much a win all around. Yep, no sign of an encroaching eldritch evil anywhere in sight.
After this, though, we begin the first of the filler arcs, and actually, as I want to get to Battle City in the next vid, let's recap them here in brief.
The first is Rebecca Hawkins. Yes, I consider her a superfluous filler character, as all she does is pad things out. The granddaughter of one of Sugoroku's former colleagues, she comes after the Motos due to their fourth Blue Eyes dragon, which she believes should be hers since it was gifted to Sugoroku from her grandfather, and like the bratty little kid she is, refuses to listen to anyone but herself.
だってバンデットキッズがそう言ってたもん。ブルーアイズは盗まれたんだって。
Yeah, that was Seto. Also, critical exposition absent in the dub that explains her actions and antagonism towards the Motos. Again, no reason for its absence.
She duels Yugi in order to reclaim it, the duel ending up a recreation of one that, astoundingly, was played by the pair's elders years before, with her innocent child act to throw off players faltering since, well, she didn't have that guise on during their first meeting. But yeah, I really dislike this character, as I dislike any characters that act like an insufferable brat, and the fact Yugi didn't put her in her place never ceases to irritate me, as it's not doing the job her grandfather Arthur says it was. Saving her from her own conceited corruption, which going all out against her would have, while still delivering the exact same lesson Arthur then relates when he only now chooses to intercede on this, when he was there and could have shut down this entire confrontation to begin with. Your Aesop is massively broken, is what I'm saying, in trying to teach her some humility and respect for her resources.
And it only gets worse when she becomes a supporting character.
Duel Monster's Quest. Him returning to helm his company and get rid of the traitorous board leaders that try to sell the brothers in Kaiba Corp out to Pegasus, Seto gets trapped in a virtual adventure game his company had been developing.
Dot Hack Duel Monsters Edition is weird. Now I'm curious why CyberConnect never created a summoner class.
And of course, once again, dialogue in the actual content that explains why Seto would even agree to this obviously trapped experience was removed from the dub, it being a bet between Seto and the Big Five on whether these division leaders would even keep their jobs after going against Seto previously. And as I said last time, this does play into his character concerning challenge and hardship, only he didn't expect them to overtly betray him again in such a manner as they did.
Why he didn't is more of a cultural thing that to some might not translate. There's a societal expectation to be loyal to the company you work for, and being fired is such a stigma that an individual may never find work in their previous field ever again. To then double down on this in such a way, for many, is literally unspeakable. Though it has often led to the failing upwards practices where incompetents are given positions of power simply out of seniority.
Mokuba recruits the group to help him rescue Seto, finding Mai in the game, who in the interim had gotten work at Kaiba Corp as a playtester due to her duelist pedigree, with the group managing to discern the game's puzzles and leveling system to rescue Prince Seto from Hell, and cut down the dragon that guards their path. All along continuing the softening of the perspective on Seto than when it once was. Mokuba relating their dream in life was to build amusement parks and other entertainment facilities so people can enjoy themselves, bring fun back to a bleak world they had experienced.
This arc also introduced two of my favorite monsters that I would use for the longest time, once they finally got brought over. Five Gods Dragon and Master of Dragon Knight. And as I've always specialized with dragons as a player of the card game, it's easy to guess why.
What's wrong with this one is, up until the end, this entire arc is repetitious to the plots, traps, and foibles previously seen in the Duelist Kingdom arc, right down to Yugi, Jonouchi, and Mai all using strategies they'd previously employed verbatim to effortlessly rush through everything. Things not actually getting interesting until they reunite with Seto for the final battle. The Big Five breaking the game to create Five God Dragon, and for a long time it was the most powerful and a very playable monster in the game with its 5,000 attack points and selective battle immunity. The same can be said of the monster best suited to defeating it. Dungeon Dice Monsters, harkening back to the manga's root structure in its pre-duelist days, brings us Ryuji Otogi, who much like Rebecca would end up serving as a worthless side character cheerleader in the series past this appearance. An entrepreneur specializing in dice, his arc is more resulting from fallout of Pegasus going MIA. Ryuji had hoped to get his own developed game into popular publication with the man's help,
especially since it's a game heavily based on duel monsters, thus would have otherwise been eligible for a copyright lawsuit.
But due to the events of Duelist Kingdom, he never heard back from him. As a result, he's directed his ire at Yugi and seeks to ruin his life. Competing with Sugoroku's store to run him out of business, humiliating Joey in a duel with the next wave of rare cards, introducing the world to limiter removal, which has haunted anyone playing against machine decks ever since, and then playing a Tem in a game of dice monsters. Ryuji, for what he is a pretty straightforward and understandable antagonist, with legitimate grievances against Yugi for playing part in unintentionally wrecking his dream. After publicizing the match, however, Ryuji's given a sign that his dream isn't dead, and to the audience that Pegasus is still alive and kicking, as Ryuji receives a message that their deal to publicize the game is still going through. 3 things with this arc. 1. It makes more obvious that the running gag insult for Jonouchi is of the dog, mainly with this suit Ryuji makes him wear, part of his running thematic of him being and having the hearts of the underdog.
With how much this element was made obvious through this running gag, that in the dub they would then choose to ignore this joke and push forth the mocking insult of Joey the Dueling Monkey, to the point the dub named an actual dueling monkey after him, when even by the expectation of 4Kids rewriting to include more humor, that would have given them plenty of material that they just ignored. This one was freaking gift-wrapped!
2. Dungeon Dice Monsters, the actual game. I collected the base set as a kid after this aired as, much like the duel with the Labyrinth Brothers, it added more of a gameplay dynamic through new modes of play that seemed interesting. But the game did not catch on because the rules were pretty damn convoluted. Unlike the card game tutorial stylization much of the series had to this point, them introducing this game this way didn't really work, as you barely knew how it all worked, and as the live game once more didn't quite match what you'd see on screen, it didn't have the speed of play of either the card game or even a regular board game, and the pieces and way to connect everything on the board didn't really work out that well, as it was more difficult to keep track of all the details, to not even get into the more gambling-styled mechanics.
Yeah, it was pretty much a flop, and no one really stocked or played it. Ironic, then, that Jonouchi lost to him, since one of his running card thematics would come to be cards heavily reliant on chance.
Which actually brings us to 3 on the noted details. Much of Jonouchi's deck upgrades are actually a result of this arc and when he challenged Ryuji originally. While he might have lost, all the cards he got fresh from part of Ryuji's challenge remained his, an understandable concession considering he doesn't have that much money, especially since he covered his sister's surgical bills and he doesn't live in a game shop.
which pretty much set the stage for the main bulk of the series, as we shall next delve into Battle City. And wow, were there a lot of changes made to that arc of the series.
私のターンはこれで終わり。でも次のターンで地獄のハーレムを体験させてあげる。